Yo, what's up, guys? Really frustrating loss tonight for the Toronto Raptors, losing to the Oklahoma City Thunder 116-107, guys. Now, valiant effort tonight by the Raptors in the fourth quarter, but just wasn't enough tonight against the defending NBA champion Oklahoma City Thunder, guys. Raptors put a valiant effort up in the fourth, but just got dominated in the second and third quarter. Put up a really solid first quarter as well, but this has been the Toronto Raptors' issue a lot of times this season, especially against top 10 NBA teams this year, guys. The Raptors have one solid quarter. They're not able to match the intensity of the better team, get their asses handed to them, and then they're unable to come back, unlike tonight where they were able to turn it up a notch defensively, were able to get some baskets, and were able to find a way to come back from a 25-point deficit. Now, obviously, there were some positives, in the first quarter. The Raptors played great defense, forcing the Thunder to turn the ball over 6 times. You saw Scotty Barnes, turning over Caruso back-to-back times on back-to-back plays. It was a really good job defensively by the Raptors. You had RJ Barrett, who had a solid first quarter. He had 11 points, made 3 3-pointers. Raptors were moving the ball really well on offense, getting stops on defense, getting chances on the fast break, doing a fantastic job on the Thunder, outscoring them 32-25 in the first quarter. But then after that, the Raptors just stopped doing what they were doing. The recipe that was succeeding in the first quarter just stopped. The Thunder made adjustments. That's why they're the NBA champion for reasons. Thunder made adjustments. They locked it up defensively, started making some shots. The Raptors started having breakdowns defensively, and then the Thunder were able to, make the Raptor 10-point lead vanish out of nowhere, and they were able to take the lead in this game. The Thunder, they didn't look back for about 2.5 quarters, almost 3 quarters basically, right? And so it was a really frustrating game for the Raptors, to say the least. The second and third quarter, like I mentioned, they got dominated defensively, of course. Many times in this game, Raptors were stagnant again on offense. Thunders got stopped on defense, pushed the ball on offense. Case and Wallace, Lou Dort were making a mess today. Obviously, no Shai Gilgeous-Alexander tonight. Obviously, no Jalen Williams, of course. It didn't matter. Those guys there made an impact, even though they did turn the ball over offensively at times in this game. They made adjustments. Wallace made some great shots. Isaiah Joe made a couple of 4-point plays in this game. Caruso's a great lockdown defender. He made some shots as well. We also know Lou Dort is another great defender who can make shots, get down low in the paint there, and then obviously when you got guys like Hardenstein and obviously Chet Holmgren, no Jakob Poeltl in the first game of a back-to-back, because you got to play the San Antonio Spurs tomorrow night. The Raptors were going to have a bit of a disadvantage at the 5 there, and you saw CMB was overwhelmed at times. Mamu barely played in this game today. He only had 15 points, and Holmgren and Hardenstein had a field day down low in the paint there, guys. It was really frustrating. Scotty and BI were turning the ball over at times, getting stopped. The Thunder's defense was spectacular, to say the least. Obviously, they're the best defense in the NBA, of course, and obviously the defending champion, like I mentioned there. So you knew the Thunder were going to make adjustments, and the Raptors were just not prepared for that, and that's a frustrating thing by this ball team. We've seen it too many times this year where the Raptors struggle against these teams. 4-14 record against the top NBA teams, and we saw it again today. Scotty only had 11 at half. RJ had 13. Those two were leading the team in offense. Brandon Ingram only had 6. CMB had no points. Quickly had 5. Mamu had 0. Jacoby was shooting the ball well, 3 for 4 from the field in the first half, having 8 points. Jamal had 6. And then Jamison Battle, he had 4 points, or 2 points, and Grady had none. These are the most frustrating things about the Raptors. Their bench couldn't do anything. The Raptors cannot beat teams in the half court, especially on offense. We just cannot shoot the basketball, consistently. The Raptors this season, of course, have shown inconsistencies, not playing a full 48 minutes, and we saw that tonight again as well. Wallace had 17 and a half. He was 7 of 7 from the field. Caruso had 14. Those two there were dominating in the first half. And then you obviously had some guys like Dort and Holmgren and Hardenstein who were separating points each. Isaiah Joe had no points in the first half, guys. Wiggins had 4. And then the other guys had no points. Topic had 3, and then that was the most frustrating thing. The Thunder, they had way more rebounds than the Raptors, 32-20 in the first half. That's just a testament to what I said. Not having Jakob Poeltl, being undermanned and undersized, that really hurt the Raptors. Their Thunder shot 50% from the field, had 30 points in the paint compared to our 20, of course. Like I said, guys, the Thunder were the more dominating team in this game tonight. Like I said, Raptors battled valiantly. The Thunder here, they were able to stagnate the Raptors on the fast break. We know the Raptors are one of the best fast break teams in the NBA. Of course, Raptors had 10 points off turnovers. That's when the Thunder obviously protected the basketball a lot better in the second quarter and in the third quarter as well. And that's what hurt the Raptors. Weren't able to go on the fast break, weren't able to get easy baskets, weren't able to spread the floor, and the Thunder were just continuing to do that in the third quarter, making their shots, dominating in the paint, making threes, locking the Raptors down defensively. It was the same old thing we saw in the second quarter, same thing in the third quarter, and then something changed in the fourth quarter. I don't know what the hell that was, but the Raptors just tightened up defensively. Thunder went cold on offense, shot 1 for 15. In like the first 7-8 minutes of the fourth quarter, and the Raptors were able to claw it back. After being down 25, they were able to tie it up at 101. Raptors played some great defense in that fourth quarter, like they did in the first quarter. Were able to turn it up in the fourth, but like I said, they tied up at 101. And then the Thunder ended the game on a 15-6 run because they were able to sub in, obviously, Holmgren. They brought in Caruso. Dort came back in, and then that was curtains. You saw Joe made some shots. Wallace made some shots, driving the lane, making some easy layups because the Raptors, again, had some breakdowns defensively at the end of the game there. That's the most frustrating thing. The Raptors played so tight defense for 6 to 7 minutes of the fourth quarter. The Thunder bring in their better players, and then boom, just like that, their defense collapses again, and the Thunder go on that 15-6 run, like I mentioned, and the game is over. It just really frustrating at times how this team here cannot put together a 48-minute game, against a top NBA team, even though we went into Oklahoma City and beat them. The Thunder tonight did not let the Raptors play their game. The Raptors had to play the Thunder game for majority of this game, even though the Raptors were the better team in the fourth quarter tonight, guys. 27-18 beating the Thunder in the fourth quarter. The Thunder, like I said, in the second and third quarter, outscoring the Raptors 35-19 in the second, 38-29 in the third, and that was the game there, guys. And like I said, Wallace played great tonight, finishing off with 27. You had Isaiah Joe, who had no points in the first half. Last time I double-checked, 0 points in the first half, like I mentioned. Isaiah Joe finishes off the game with 22 bloody points, 2 4-point plays. Like I mentioned there, guys, Dort had 15, Hartenstein had 11, Caruso had 16. Didn't have a very effective second half scoring-wise, but solid defensive player, guys. And then after you had Wiggins, Williams didn't have much points, McCain didn't have much points. It was mainly those three guys there, Caruso, Wallace, Joe, and then obviously you had some contributions from Dort and Holmgren there. But like I said, guys, you got to play a second night of a back-to-back now tomorrow. First night of a back-to-back was tonight. Tomorrow's the second of a back-to-back against an even tougher team, to say the least, even though we just played the champions. You're playing the hottest team in the NBA tomorrow in the San Antonio Spurs, who just went into Detroit and absolutely smacked them. Wemby had 17 rebounds, 21 points. He is an absolute monster. That's why the Raptors rested Yat tonight. But man, oh man, the Raptors put in a great effort in the fourth, But like I said, you got to play 48 minutes. Inconsistencies hurt this team too many times. Not playing for 48 minutes kills this team a lot, especially against the top NBA teams there, guys. You had some good games today, by RJ Barrett, 21 points offensively, but defensively, he's been a liability this season, of course, at times, especially in tonight's game, was a liability defensively at times, RJ. Jamal had a good offensive game again, having 12 last game, 13 points today. Jacoby had 17, Quickly had 17. Obviously, wasn't the best game for some guys like Murray Boyle, Sandro Mamukelashvili, of course, Grady Dick having another bad game, of course, only playing 5 minutes with 0 points. Now, really frustrating to see what kind of year Grady Dick is having. Scotty and B.I. had difficult games tonight, but we obviously know how important Scotty is. The point differential with him off the floor and on the floor is absolutely massive. The Raptors were a minus 25, I think, Scotty, when he was not on the floor, and then they were a plus 16 when he was on the floor. So Scotty just makes a massive impact for this ball team, guys. But, him and B.I. did not have the best night. Both of them shared 15 points each. Wasn't a great game by them. That's just a testament to the Thunder being such a great defensive team. They're a great team. Like I said, with O'Shea and Williams, and you found the way to win tonight, the Thunder, that's really impressive. Even though they did not have a good fourth quarter, great teams find a way to win, and that's what the Thunder did tonight. Raptors shot 47%, same with the Thunder, 40% from three for the Thunder. Raptors shot better from 47%, but Thunder did a great job defensively, guys. Out-rebounding the Raptors 59-45. Like I said, the size disparity there with Mamu and CMB. Mamu only playing 15 minutes tonight. He couldn't handle the size of Chet Holmgren. And obviously Hartenstein, of course, 12 offensive rebounds for the Thunder compared to our 7. We had more assists. Steals were even. Turnovers, 16 turnovers. That's a lot of turnovers for the Raptors. 56 points in the paint for the Thunder compared for the Raptors, 38. Just another thing there, like I mentioned, guys. 17 second chance points for the Thunder. 15-6 fast break points. Usually that's the Raptors. Tonight it was the Oklahoma City Thunder playing the Raptors game against them, guys. And then 15 points off turnovers for the Thunder. We had 22. So, listen, guys, really frustrating night tonight for the Raptors. It don't get easier for them. Spurs tomorrow night. Then you got the Knicks and the Timberwolves. It's only going to get more difficult for the Raptors. Like I said, a 4-14 record against top 10 teams in the NBA, guys. You got some decent performances tonight by some players, but once again, you had a great first quarter, great fourth quarter, horrible second and third quarter, and that was the difference in this game. If the Raptors had just played a consistent 48 minutes, you probably win this game tonight. But once again, they fell asleep defensively, had breakdowns defensively as well. Turned the ball over too many times on offense, took some stupid shots as well. Give the Thunder credit as well. Played solid defense in this game. Made some great shots as well, Oklahoma City, especially with the two of their best players, obviously the MVP in Shea, and obviously no Jalen Williams, of course. But man, oh man, just another game where you say to yourself, this Raptors team still has a lot to learn when it comes to being one of the best teams in the NBA. Just not being able to lock down for 48 minutes is what hurts this team a lot this year, guys. We've seen it a lot this year where the Raptors just are too inconsistent at times. And it's very frustrating. This team here has to work on that. Maybe make some deals in the offseason, make this team better defensively. Get some bloody shooters in this team because as we see, the Raptors get cold on offense. The other team starts scoring offensively, and the Raptors defense starts to slow down, and then boom, it gets up to a 20, 25-point lead like we saw tonight. But valiant effort by the team tonight. Just unfortunate loss for them tonight. We'll see how they do tomorrow night against the Spurs. That's going to be an even more difficult game, to say the least, guys. But we'll love to your thoughts and opinions on this game tonight, guys. So click like this video, subscribe if you guys want to see more content. Go Raptors, go as always, guys. See you guys on the next episode of Raptors Unfiltered. Ciao, guys.